subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this video tutorial on how to use the offset function in Excel. So the offset function is part of the lookup and reference group of functions in Excel. So if you jump up to the formulas ribbon, you will find this little function located in the lookup and reference drop down. And there we go, there he is in there. Now what offset enables you to do is to return a result from a specific cell or range of cells that is a specified number of rows and columns away from the cell you have specified. Now again, that's quite hard to visualize by me just saying that. The best way is to look at some examples. So let's start out by looking at a very basic form of offset. So on the screen here, I have some sales figures for the North, South, East and West regions over a 12-month period. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the offset function to obtain the sales figures for July for the West region. So essentially the figure I'm looking for here is this figure 679. Now in cell G3, I'm going to type in equals offset and open my bracket. Now the first argument here is reference. What is the starting point? Now this is essentially where your mouse is clicked, the cell you're starting from, and that could be anywhere. Now in this example, I'm going to say that my starting point is cell A2, comma. The next argument it's asking for is rows. So I'm looking for all sales for the West region for July. So how many cells do I need to count down in order to get the rows? Well, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm counting down 7 rows, comma. How many columns across? Well, I'm looking for the West region. So 1, 2, 3, 4. For columns, comma, height. So this is where you can specify how many cells you want. So I'm just looking for one cell. I just want the figure 679. So my height is going to be one cell and my width is also going to be one cell. Close my bracket, hit enter, and it gives me 679, which is exactly the answer I was looking for. So let's get rid of this and let's look at another example of offset. And this time I'm going to combine it with the sum function. And what I want it to do is I want it to look for two cells. So I want it to look for these two cells, and then I want it to add those two cells together, which is where the sum function comes in. I'm going to have my starting point is still going to be A2. So if I construct my offset formula, if I type in equals, and I need to type in my sum first of all, bracket, I'm going to do offset, because remember, anything that you put in the brackets is what it's going to do first. And I want it to find the location of these values first before it sums them. So now we want our reference. What is our starting point? It's going to be A2, comma. How many rows am I moving down? So I want to essentially sum C4 and D4, and that is 2 rows down. How many columns across? Well, I can see that that is 1, 2, comma, the height. Now I still want the height to be one cell, so I'm going to type in 1, comma, but this time, because I wanted to sum together two cells, my width is 2 cells wide. So my width is going to be 2. I close off my offset and then I close off my sum. Hit enter and it's going to give me the total of these two cells. And again, if you don't believe that, then you can just do a quick sum calculation to check. Let's just add these two together. And there we go, 2475. Now it's also worth noting that you can use offset with negative numbers. And again, this relates to your starting point. So for example, now I want to use the offset function to return the value for July for the South region. So we're looking for this figure just here. But this time my starting cell or my reference cell isn't going to be cell A2. it's going to be cell A13. So I want to count back in my rows, and this is where we use a negative number. So let's construct our offset. My reference, my starting point is A13, comma, how many rows? Now I'm looking for July, so 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going back 4 rows, so my row is going to be -4, comma. How many am I counting across? I'm counting across 2, comma, and I just want the one cell, so my height is going to be 1 and my width is going to be 1. Close off my offset, hit enter, and it gives me 481, which is exactly what I was looking for. Now, what about if I want to return multiple values with offset? You can definitely do that as well. So what if I wanted it to return all of the values from the South region from April down to September? I want all of these returned using my offset. So again, very simple. I'm going to type in equals offset. This time I'm going to choose my starting point of A3, comma. How many rows am I moving down? I'm going 1, 2, 3. How many rows am I moving across? Well, I want the southern region, so that's 1, 2, comma. Now, what's my height? Now, I want it to return multiple values. So how many cells do I have here? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my height is 6 cells, comma, my width is still just 1 cell. Close my offset, hit enter, and it pulls back those figures. And as you can imagine, you can do exactly the same, but going across. So if this time I wanted to pull back all of the figures for all of the regions for July, I could do something very similar. I just need to modify one of the options. So let's do equals offset, open bracket. My cell reference is going to be A3 again. I'm going to say comma. We're going to count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, comma. How many columns am I going across? Well, I'm only going across 1 in this example, comma. My height is going to be 1, but my width is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Close off my offset, hit enter, and it's now giving me this row of figures. Let's look at one more example where we have a slight variation. This time I'm going to pull back 2 rows. So I'm going to pull back this range just here. So let's construct our offset. I'm going to say equals offset. My starting cell, my reference is going to be A3, comma. How many rows are we counting down? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, comma. How many columns are we going across? I'm going across 1, comma. What's the height going to be? Now, well, this time that's going to be 2, comma. The width is going to be 4 because I want all of the regions. Close off my offset, and it pulls back those numbers. So the only adjustments we really made there was the height. The height is 2 cells in this case, and we have 4 cells as the width. So there we go, very simple and straightforward. You've seen a few examples there of how you can utilize offset. So maybe have a think about how you can incorporate that or how it might be useful in your day-to-day work. I hope you found that helpful. That's it for this video tutorial, and I will see you in the next one. Hi everyone, and welcome to this video tutorial on using what-if analysis scenarios in Excel. Now, if you've never used Scenarios before, Scenarios is a utility available as part of the What-If Analysis Toolkit in Excel. And you'll find these on the Data ribbon. In the Forecast group, you'll have a little drop down there for What-If Analysis, and you'll see you've got 3 options there. And the one that we're focusing on in this video is the Scenario Manager. Now, what scenarios allow you to do is to try out different values or scenarios so that you can easily see which set of conditions will create the most favorable outcome. And you can create multiple scenarios and try them out on your data risk-free. So what I mean by that is it won't permanently change the underlying data. And you can toggle between those scenarios and even create a summary report to see the scenarios compared side by side. So it's a really useful little feature. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to jump into a very basic example. We're going to set up some scenarios and I can show you how they can work for you. So in this example, I am using a household budget. So this is very simple. I have income listed at the top here, so my salary essentially. Underneath I have all of my outgoings, so what I spend each month. I have a total of my outgoings, which is just a sum calculation of B7 to B15. And then finally, right at the bottom, I have the amount of money I have left over, or the amount of disposable income I have each month based on this scenario just here. So again, the amount left is just a sum calculation. It's doing B4, which is my income, minus the total of my outgoing. So I can see that each month in this scenario, currently, I have $1,335 of disposable income. Now what I want to do is I want to compare this to some other scenarios. So essentially what I'm going to say is that this is my original scenario. But what I want to see is how my figures look. So really the amount of disposable income I'm going to have left at the end of the month if I was to get a promotion. And I then want to see what this looks like in a third scenario, which might be me obtaining a new job. So each of these scenarios are going to have variable values. And what I mean by that is that if I get a promotion, that might mean that my salary will increase. If I get a new job, then that might also mean that my salary will increase. And maybe because I have an increased salary, I'm going to start spending more on going out. Or maybe I have to travel a little bit further, so I'm going to have more travel costs. So these values are going to change in each scenario. And essentially what I'm trying to do is find out which scenario is going to be best for me. Do I stay in my current position? Do I take the promotion? Or do I go for that new job? So we're going to set up 3 scenarios. Now, before we do this, I want to show you something which is really going to help you when it comes to creating a summary report and being able to understand the data that you're looking at. Now, this might not make too much sense as I'm doing it. You may not be able to figure out why I'm actually doing it, but hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a full understanding. So the first thing I always like to do is I like to name my ranges. And I'm going to name the ranges for the data that could change. Now, this isn't going to be a tutorial on how to name ranges, so if you're not sure what that is or how you do that, then that's definitely something worth looking up or Googling. I'm just going to do it very quickly. I'm going to highlight where it says salary and the value. And I'm also going to highlight some of these other items that may change. So I'm going to hold down my control key and I'm going to highlight all of these. And that is pretty much it. So now I'm going to name these ranges. And I'm going to do that by jumping across to the Formulas ribbon. And you can see in the Defined Names group, I'm going to utilize the Create from Selection button just here. And what Excel does is it says, do you want me to create names for these values based on what is in the left column? So it's recognized that I've highlighted some text in the left column. And if I say yes, use names in the left column, essentially cell B4 is going to be named salary, cell B7 is going to be named rent, cell B8 is going to be named electricity, so on and so forth. So I'm going to click on OK. And I can just do a quick check to make sure that those have been done by clicking the drop down in the name box, and I can now see that I have all of those listed just there. So if I was to select electricity, it's going to jump me to the cell that relates to electricity. Now this is a really important step, and as I said, you'll see why when we get to the end of this video and we start creating our summary reports. Now that I've done that, I can actually go in and start creating my scenarios. So I'm going to jump back to the Data tab. I'm going to go to What If Analysis, and I'm going to jump into Scenario Manager. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to define our first scenario. Now, I always recommend making an original scenario so that when you start changing things, you can always jump back to your original figures. So that's the first one we're going to do. I'm going to click on Add. I'm going to give my scenario a name. I'm going to call it original. And it's asking me for the changing cells. So I'm going to remove B8 from here. And my changing cells are essentially going to be the ones that we just named. So I'm going to click in cell B4. I'm going to hold down Control and I'm going to select the rest of these cells. Click on OK. And what it does is it pulls those through. So you can see here it's got salary, rent, electricity, water, and all of the corresponding values. Now this is why it's good to name your ranges. If I hadn't have named these, what you would see in here is just the cell reference. So instead of salary, it would say B4. Instead of rent, it would say B7. And that might be fine. It's not necessary to name your ranges, but sometimes it just makes it quite complicated to see which item relates to which value. It's a lot easier if you have them named in a meaningful way. Now this is the original scenario. I'm not changing anything here, so I'm just going to click on OK. And you can see now I have an original scenario listed. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another scenario for if I get a promotion. So let's click on Add. I'm going to call it Promotion. The changing cells are the same cells. I'm going to click on OK. But now I'm going to input my values that are relevant for if I get a promotion. So let's say if I get a promotion, I'm going to be earning a bit more money. So we're going to change this to 3,500. If I look through the rest of my values, I can see probably these aren't going to change too much. But it might be that if I am earning a little bit more, then I'm going to spend a little bit more on going out. So I'm going to change this from 300 to 350. And I think that's about it for this one. I'm going to click on OK, and I now have my promotion scenario. I'm going to add a third scenario, and this one is going to be if I take that new job that I've been looking at. I'm going to click on OK. Now this new job, the salary is 4,000 a month. But one of the drawbacks of this new job is that it is a little bit further away, so I'm going to have to spend a bit more on travel costs. So I'm going to put that up to 350. My new job is also in a more expensive part of the town, so that means that gyms cost a little bit more. I like to go to the gym in my lunch break. So I'm going to put this gym up to 220. And I also might decide that I am still going to spend a little bit more on going out, and I'm going to change that to 350 and click on OK. Now I have 3 scenarios there. You can of course go through and add more if you like, but in this example I'm fairly happy with those 3. So now if I want to see the amount of disposable income I'm going to have left if I take that promotion, all I need to do is select the promotion scenario and click on the Show button, and my figures now update. If I select New Job and click the Show button, my figures update again, and if I want to get back to my original scenario, I have that listed there. I can click Show, and it puts me back to how it was. So a really nice way of being able to see what your values are going to look like in all these different scenarios. Now the final thing I want to show you here is that it's all well and good being able to toggle between these different scenarios, but imagine if you've got quite a few of them, it's quite hard to remember which one is going to be the best outcome for you. Really what you would want is to see them all side by side so you can make a direct comparison. And that is where the summary report comes in. So you can see here I have a summary button. If I click that, it's going to ask me what do I want to create, a scenario summary, or I could create a pivot table report. Now at the moment I want to create a scenario summary. Click on OK. It creates a new worksheet, and now I can see all of my scenarios side by side. So it's showing me what I currently have on my spreadsheet, so the current values. It's showing me my original scenario, my promotion scenario, and my new job scenario, and I can see my disposable income at the bottom just here. And because I didn't name that cell, you can see I have the cell reference just here. So that is what all of these would look like if I hadn't named them. So it might be that you also want to name the amount left just here. You might want to highlight that and add that as a named range so that when you do the report, it says amount left as opposed to the cell reference. But this allows me to see very quickly which is going to be the best scenario, and I can see here I would have the most disposable income if I took the new job. So that is it, a very quick run through of the extremely useful Scenario Manager in the What If Analysis Tools group. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I will see you in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome to this video tutorial on comparing two lists in Excel using VLOOKUP. Now, comparing lists or columns of data is a really useful skill to learn. Quite often you might be faced with a situation where you have two lists that are slightly different and you need to be able to run a check to see where the matches or the differences are. And there are many different ways that you can do this. This is just my preferred method because I love using VLOOKUP wherever possible. So what I'm going to show you in this lesson is a couple of examples of how you can use VLOOKUP to compare two lists of data to highlight differences. And I'm also going to throw in a couple of other functions and utilities that can make your results look a lot more meaningful. So without further ado, let's dive straight in. So in this first example, I have a worksheet called Employees 1. This has a list of employee IDs, the employee name, the department for that employee, and then the date they were hired. I also have a second worksheet called Employees 2, which has very similar information in it. So it might be that I work in HR, and the Employees 1 worksheet is the log of employees that I keep. And Employees 2 might be a log of the same thing that maybe one of my colleagues keeps. And she sent me this Employees 2 list, but I've noticed that there are some discrepancies. The first thing I've noticed is that her list is slightly shorter than mine. So hers goes down to row 46, whereas mine goes down to row 51. So I can see that there are some discrepancies here. So my task is to compare these two lists and find out which records are missing from my colleague's employee list. And we're going to use VLOOKUP and a couple of other functions to do this, and we're going to build it up step by step so that it's easy for you to understand. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is something that is optional, but is something that I find really helps me out when I'm doing this type of thing. And that is, I'm going to start out by naming the range of data. So I'm going to jump across to Employees 2, which is the list that my colleague has sent me. I'm going to click in my data and press the Control-A key to select all. Using the name box just above, I'm going to click in there and I'm going to give this cell range a meaningful name. So I'm going to call this Employees 2 and hit Enter to set that name. Now that I've done that, I can use that range name in my formula as opposed to having to come in and select the cell references. So let's jump back to Employees 1. So now I'm going to construct my VLOOKUP formula. I'm going to do it in cell F2 and type in equals VLOOKUP. Now the VLOOKUP formula has 4 different arguments, with the last one being optional. The first argument, which is highlighted in bold, is the lookup value. Now a couple of points to note here about using VLOOKUP. The lookup value is the piece of information that you want to use to look up data in the other table, so the table on the Employees 2 worksheet. And the lookup value that you choose should always be a value that is present in both tables of data. So for example, the employee ID, I know that I have that in my list and my colleague also has that in her list. So that would be a good choice for a lookup value. The lookup value should be unique, so you don't want anything that has any duplicates. And you should also have your lookup value in the leftmost column of your data. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to use the employee ID as my lookup value. So my first argument is going to be cell A2, comma. I now need to tell Excel where I'm looking up the employee ID, which table. Well, I want to look it up in the table of data on the Employees 2 worksheet. Now, because I named that range of cells, I don't have to click across to the Employees 2 worksheet and select the cell range. I can simply press the F3 key, which is going to pull up any named ranges that I have in my workbook. I can select Employees 2 and click on OK, comma. column index number. Now, ordinarily, when you're performing a VLOOKUP, the column index number is the number of the column that you want to return. So essentially, what result are you looking for? Now, in this case, I really just want Excel to tell me if a record is missing or if it isn't. So I don't specifically want to pull back a particular column index number. It's also worth noting that Excel numbers columns from left to right, starting at 1. So the employee ID would be column 1, the employee column 2, department column 3, so on and so forth. Now in this scenario, I'm not particularly interested in any specific column, so I can select any of them. So let's just go with column number 1, comma. My final argument is a true or false argument. Am I doing an approximate match or an exact match? Now this refers to your lookup value. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking up the employee ID in the employees to table, and I want Excel to do an exact match. I want it to exactly match that employee ID. So in this case, I'm going to add a false on the end. Remember, with any true or false arguments in Excel, you can replace them with a 1 or a 0 respectively. Close my bracket, hit enter, and let's see what we get. So let's copy this formula down using the fill handle. I'm just going to drag all the way down and let go. And what you'll see is that because we chose to return column number 1, it's going to give me the employee number. But everywhere that it doesn't find a match, I have an NA error. So essentially, anything with a number next to it is present in the employees to table. Anything with an NA is not. So these essentially are the records that are missing from my colleague's dataset. Now this result is absolutely fine. I can pretty much see what I need to see. I can see which records are missing, but it's not particularly neat. So let's take a look at a few techniques we can use to tidy this up and make the results a little bit more meaningful. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to cell F2, and up in the formula bar I'm going to click in front of that VLOOKUP formula, and I'm going to add some error handling in here. Now because I have an NA error, I'm going to use the function is NA, an open bracket. Now because I've opened a bracket, I need to close one off on the end. My only argument is the formula that I currently have in there, and if I hit enter and then copy this formula down, this is going to convert my results into true or false. So wherever I have a true result, that represents missing records. That is where those NA errors were. So now this does look a little bit neater. I don't have random employee IDs and NA errors all over my spreadsheet, but it is still quite hard to pick out those true results in column F. So how can I make this even more meaningful and even easier for anyone looking at this data to instantly see which records are missing? Well, I'm going to go up to the formula bar and I'm going to edit my formula again. And this time I'm going to add an if function onto the front. Now what an if function does, if you're not familiar with it, is it performs a logical test and then produces one result if the value is true and one result if the value is false. And this is going to allow me to assign text to those true and false results, therefore making it a lot more meaningful. Now the first argument we have here is the logical test. And basically the formula that I already have in here is my logical test. So I'm going to click at the end, press comma. I now need to define what I want it to output if the value is true. So wherever I have a true result, I want it to say missing record. And remember, when you're dealing with text, you need to put it in quote marks. What do I want Excel to output if it finds a false result? Well, in this case, I'm not too concerned about having anything in there. I could put text like OK or maybe record present. In this case, I just want to have a blank cell, so I'm going to add in 2 quote marks. Close the bracket, hit enter, and now if I copy this down, my results are a lot tidier and those missing records now really stand out from the list. So simply by using a few different formulas, I've managed to extract a really meaningful result. My VLOOKUP is pulling back the information that I want. I'm using isNA to change my results to true or false, and then I'm changing the true or false result to something more meaningful using the if function. That is quite a lot to take in, so let's practice this and just do it one more time. In this example, I have something reasonably similar, but this time we're dealing with invoice numbers. So on this first worksheet, invoice report, this is an invoice report for the client Microworld. So maybe I'm an accountant and I keep an invoice log for all of the invoices for this particular client. And then maybe at the end of the year, the client sends me their log of their invoices. And what I want to do as the accountant is compare the report I've been sent by the client with the report that I have on file to see if there's any discrepancies. So let's use exactly the same method. I'm going to jump to my customer report and I'm going to name the range. I'm going to call this customer underscore report. And remember, when you're naming ranges, you can't have any spaces, so separate different words with an underscore or make them all one word. Now I'm going to construct my VLOOKUP, open bracket. My lookup value is going to be the invoice number because that is common between the two tables. The table array, well, I'm going to press the F3 key and select customer report. Which column do I want to pull back? Well, it doesn't really matter, so let's just use column 1. And then I want to exactly match that invoice number, so I'm going to have a false argument on the end. Hit enter, and then I can use my fill handle to copy those results down. Once again, I'm seeing NA wherever it finds a discrepancy. So let's jump up to our formula bar and use our isNA function to handle those errors and turn them into true or false results. And finally, I'm then going to add in my if function to make these results more meaningful. My logical test is my formula, so all I need to do is add on to the end what I want it to say if the value is true. So if it's true, I want it to say missing, and this time if it's false, I want it to say OK. Close my bracket and hit enter. Copy down. And instantly I can see which invoices are missing in the spreadsheet that the client has sent me. So finally, I just want to show you a little trick how you can use conditional formatting to highlight or provide a background fill for any of these missing records. And this again is reasonably straightforward to do. Now the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to click in cell E4 so I can see my formula, and I'm going to copy part of this formula. So I'm going to select from the front of isNA and I'm going to select all of the VLOOKUP formula. This is the only part I need to use. Control C to copy to the clipboard and then press Escape to come out of edit mode. What I'm going to do now is basically select all of the data excluding the headings in my table. And with that selection made, I'm going to go to the Home tab, Conditional Formatting, and I'm going to create a new rule. And what I'm going to say here underneath Select a Rule Type is I want to use a formula to determine which cells to format. And in the box underneath, I'm going to press Ctrl V to paste in that formula that I copied to the clipboard. Now, one thing I need to add onto the front here is an equal sign, so Excel knows that that is actually a formula. So now I have my formula in here, I need to tell Excel how I want to format those cells. So wherever we have a missing record, I want the background fill to be a different color, and I also want to highlight the values in bold. So let's click on Format. I'm going to jump across to the Fill tab and select a fill color. So let's do this lighter green. I'm also going to make the font bold. Click on OK. Now, if I just click OK here, it's not going to look correct. So let's do that. And you can see that I haven't really got the result that I'm looking for. Now, why is that? Well, if we go back up to Conditional Formatting and Manage Rules, and let's edit this rule and take another look at it. Now, the problem here is with this cell reference A4. What I need to do is I need to make the column absolute by adding a dollar symbol in front of the column only. because essentially I want this formatting to run across the width of the row but not the column. And now if I click on OK and OK again, you can see I get the result I was looking for. And of course, if I now wanted to, I no longer really need column E, so I can just delete out that column, and I have a nice neat list with just the records that are missing highlighted. I can then use this to follow up with the client and work out where the discrepancy has occurred. So those are a few different techniques that you can use to compare two lists or two columns of data in Excel using formulas and conditional formatting. I hope you enjoyed that lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone, and welcome to this tutorial video on XLOOKUP. Now, XLOOKUP is a lookup function in Excel. If we click on the Formulas ribbon, you will find it lurking in the Functions library underneath this Lookup and Reference area. And you'll see as we scroll down, we have XLOOKUP at the bottom. Now, if you've never used XLOOKUP before, you may be more familiar with VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP or even something like index and match. And if you've ever used any of those functions to perform lookups previously, then I think you're going to find XLOOKUP really exciting. The closest thing I can compare it to would be index and match, as it has the same ability to look up a value in a table and return a result no matter where the result is located in the table. VLOOKUP has some limitations, and I will discuss that as we go through. So the easiest thing to do is really just to demo this amazing new function in Excel. So let's look at the data that we're using first of all. Now I have a table here which just lists some apps that you might find on a mobile device. It's showing me the category in the first column. I have the app name in column B. I have the amount of revenue generated and the amount of profit. Now what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to select an app in cell H2, and you can see I have a little data validation list with all of my apps loaded up. And once I select that app, I want it to tell me what the category is for that app, what the revenue, and what the profit is. And we're going to use the XLOOKUP function in order to do this. Let me first explain how XLOOKUP differs from VLOOKUP. With a VLOOKUP, whatever you're looking up, so in this case it's going to be the value in H2 when I select an application, the lookup value must always be in the leftmost column. So what that means in this scenario is that if I'm looking for the category of the app, if I was using VLOOKUP, I wouldn't be able to find it because the app or the lookup item is to the right of what I want to return. And that is the limitation of VLOOKUP. It works from left to right. Now, historically, we've always got around that by utilizing the index and match functions together, which basically lets us do exactly what XLOOKUP now does, but with a lot less stress and headaches. So let's see XLOOKUP in action. I'm going to click in cell H5 and I'm going to type in equals XLOOKUP. And now we get our arguments, and you'll see there's quite a lot of them there. Now remember that the ones in square brackets, so if not found, match mode and search mode, they're actually optional arguments. Anytime you see an argument that's in a square bracket, it's optional. And we are going to explore one of these in later examples, but I really just want to focus on these first three arguments in this particular example. So the first thing we need to tell Excel is what is our lookup value? What are we looking up? So I'm going to be looking up the app, which is going to be in cell H2. The app is my lookup value. Comma, lookup array. Where do I want to find this app name? Well, I want to find it in the list of apps. So my lookup array is B3 to B10. Comma. It then says, okay, once I've found it, what column do you want me to return, or which range contains the piece of information you want returned? So I'm looking for the category for this app. So my return array is going to be the category A3 to A10. Close my bracket. It is that simple. For anyone who's done this using index and match, hopefully you will see how much simpler this is. Press enter. Now currently I get NA, and that's because the lookup value is H2, and currently I have nothing in H2. So what I need to do is either type in an app name or select from my data validation list. So if I say Office Lens, you'll see that that now updates and it's telling me the category is productivity. If I refer to my table over here and find Office Lens, I can see, in fact, that is correct. The category is productivity. And if I was to select a different app from this drop-down list, Instagram, for example, it's going to pull back a different result. Now, if I didn't have a data validation list, I could just type into H2 as well. And if you're interested in learning how to create things like data validation lists, I will be doing a video on that very soon. So let's utilize XLOOKUP again and find the revenue and the profit. So I'm going to say equals XLOOKUP, open bracket. My lookup value is H2, comma, lookup array, I'm still looking for the app in the list of apps, comma, what do I want returned? I want the revenue returned. So I select the revenue array, close my bracket, enter. 30,000. A quick visual check, and I can see that yes, in fact, that is the correct answer. Let's do the final one, because practice does in fact make perfect. XLOOKUP, open bracket, lookup value H2. I'm looking for it in the apps list, comma, and this time I want to return the profit. Close my bracket, and there we go. And once again, if I select a different item, it's going to update and give me the correct results. So much simpler than index and match, and much more flexible than VLOOKUP. Now I'm going to quickly show you another example. So I'm going to jump across to my XLOOKUP 2 worksheet. Now I have the same table. I have a slightly different layout. My app is going to be at the top here, and I'm still looking for the revenue and the profit for the app listed in B1. But the difference here is that I'm going to use a single formula to return me both results. So I'm going to get the revenue and the profit using one formula. So let's start out by typing in an app. I'm going to say Facebook up here. And in revenue, I'm going to construct my XLOOKUP equals XLOOKUP, open bracket. My lookup value is going to be B1, comma. I'm looking for it in the apps list, B7 to B14, comma. Now I want it to return the revenue and the profit. And because these columns are next to each other, all I need to do is select both of the columns. So I'm including both ranges here, C7 to D14, close my bracket, hit enter, and I magically get both results using one formula. Once again, you could have this as a data validation drop-down list, or alternatively, you could type in, let's go for LinkedIn this time, and you'll see that those results update. Now what I want to do is I'm going to add in some error checking into this formula. And if you remember at the beginning of this video, I mentioned those optional arguments that you have for the XLOOKUP function. So what I'm going to do is in B1, I'm going to make a quick spelling error. I'm going to say linked in. So now I'm getting an error here. It says NA because it can't find LinkedIn in the list of apps because I've spelt it wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit my formula, and I'm going to edit up in the formula bar and add in some error checking so that if there is some kind of error, instead of an NA, which isn't very meaningful, it might say something like app not found. So at the end of my formula, I'm going to click in here. I'm going to do a comma, and you can now see underneath the argument that I have highlighted in bold is if not found. So what do I want the formula to do if it can't find the app? And I want it to produce a message, which I'm going to put in quote marks because it's text, of app not found. And it's always good to build error checking into your formulas because it really helps people understand exactly where they've gone wrong. So now if I hit enter, you can see I'm getting that message, app not found. If I now replace that with something that's correct, booking, it's going to give me my results. If I spell something wrong, so if I type in Sportify and hit enter, I get app not found. So think about utilizing error checking as well. Now in this final example, I'm going to show you how you can utilize named ranges. Now, if you've never used a named range before, all it means is that you are assigning a name to a specific range of cells. So I might choose to name this group of cells apps, maybe this group of cells category, so on and so forth. And I always recommend that people do try and name their ranges wherever possible, because it instantly makes your formulas more meaningful and much easier for people to understand what's going on. So let's name a couple of ranges and then let's utilize them in our XLOOKUP formula. So I'm going to name this range just here, category. And to name a range, it's very simple. You jump up to the name box, which is just above and to the left of the formula bar, click and type in the name of your range, category, and hit enter. I'm also going to name this range. I'm going to call that one revenue. And it's worth noting when you are using named ranges, if you want to name them 2 words, you can't have a space in there. So you would have to separate with an underscore if you wanted to name it something like that, or you would have to make it all 1 word. So just bear that in mind. And then finally, I'm going to name this range profit. So now I have my ranges named, and if you're wondering where those ranges are kept once they're named, if you go to your formulas ribbon and into the name manager, you will see any named ranges that you have in there, and you can edit them, delete them, create new ones if you want to from here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to my XLOOKUP formula and I'm going to edit it up in the formula bar. So here we have XLOOKUP. It's utilizing H2 as the lookup value. That's fine. Then the next cell range we have just here is the app cell range. Now I didn't name the app cell range, but I did name A3 to A10. So I'm going to highlight A3 to A10 and replace it with the named range. So you'll see as I start to type it in, Excel helps me out. It says I've found a named range and I can double click to select it. Hit enter and my formula still works. I could do the same over here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm also going to name this range of data. I'm going to call this apps. I'm going to go into the XLOOKUP formula for revenue. I'm going to highlight B3 to B10 and replace that with apps. And then I'm going to highlight C3 to C10 and replace that with revenue. Now a little tip here, if you can't remember what you've named your range, if you press the F3 key on your keyboard, Excel will show you all of the named ranges that you have in your workbook. So I can see here, okay, it's revenue that I'm looking for. Click on OK, hit enter, and my answer is correct. And look how much easier that formula is to understand for anybody looking at it. Instead of cell ranges, we now have meaningful names. Let's do the final one just to be consistent. So I'm going to replace B3. I'm going to press the F3 key on my keyboard and select apps. And then I'm going to select D3 to D10, F3 key, and I'm going to replace that with profit. Hit enter and my formula still works. And let's just check by switching to a different app. There we go. So that's a few different examples of how you can utilize XLOOKUP and also how you can incorporate named ranges into those formulas. That's it for this tutorial. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Simon Says It tutorial on SUMIFS in Microsoft Excel. Now, if you've never used the SUMIFS function before, you'll be very pleased to know that it's a much welcome enhancement to that old Excel favourite SUMIF. Now, both SUMIF and SUMIFS are part of the Maths and Trig group of formulas. So if you're looking for them, this is exactly where you will find them. And basically what SUMIFS can be used for is to add a range of numbers based on one or more pieces of criteria. And that's really what makes it different from the SUMIF function, which could really only handle one piece of criteria. So what I want to do in this tutorial is we're going to start out by just doing a basic SUMIF, and then once we've got our head around that, we're going to move on to using SUMIFS and adding in more criteria. So let's start out by taking a look at our data and then reminding ourselves of how to do a SUMIF calculation. So what I have on the worksheet here is a very basic table. So we have some items listed in column A. So these look to be clothing items. We have the colour, we have the size, the amount of revenue, and then the amount of profit. And then what I have is this little table above, and I've just added in some data validation drop-down lists to help me pick the item, the colour and the size. And essentially what I want to be able to do is select anything from this cell range just here and then have the formulas calculate underneath. So we're going to start out with a SUMIF calculation. So in this first example, I want to construct a formula that's going to allow me to sum the price for all skirts. Now for this we can use SUMIF because we only have one piece of criteria. So let's type in SUMIF and open our bracket and take a look at our arguments. So the first thing it's asking us for is range. Now when you're thinking about what your range is, bear in mind what your criteria is going to be. So I want to sum the price of all of the skirts. So my criteria is going to be the skirt. So my range is going to be wherever I'm going to find that piece of information. And I'm going to find that information in cells A2 to A19. That is my range. Comma, what is my criteria? Well, I'm looking for the skirt. And in this case, the skirt is listed in cell G2. Comma. My final argument here that's in square brackets, so it is optional, I want to tell Excel what I want it to sum. So when it looks through those items, every time it finds whatever is in G2, which in this case is the skirt, what do I want Excel to do? Well, I could choose to have it sum the profit, or I could choose to have it sum the revenue. So in this case, I'm going to choose revenue. So my sum range is going to be D2 to D19. Close my bracket and hit enter. And there we go, it's come up with a total of $44. Now, because I don't have a great deal of information here, what I can do is take a look. So I've got a skirt just there. I have one just here. And then I have a final one just here. And if you take a look down in my status bar, you can see that the sum is 44. So I know that this calculation is actually working correctly. So that is how you can utilize SUMIF. It works really well if you just have one piece of criteria. But what if I want more than one piece of criteria? That is where I would use SUMIFS. Let's add something into this example. I'm going to basically do the same thing. I'm going to sum all of the skirts, but this time I'm going to add in a second piece of criteria. I only want to sum skirts that are grey. So because I have two pieces of criteria, I need to use SUMIFS, and one major difference between SUMIFS and SUMIF is the order of these arguments. If you remember when we were constructing the SUMIF, the sum range argument actually comes at the end, whereas when you're using SUMIFS, you set out your sum range at the beginning of the calculation. So once again, I'm going to calculate the revenue. So let's select the revenue range, D2 to D19. My next argument is then criteria range 1. So again, we're selecting the range. Now, my first piece of criteria is skirt. So my range is going to be wherever I'm going to find that, which is A2 to A19. I now need to specify my criteria, and that is cell G2. Now I can carry on. It's asking me criteria range 2 and then criteria 2. So I can carry on going. So my next criteria range, well, I want to look for the colour grey. So my range, where I'm going to find that, is going to be B2 to B19. And my criteria is going to be what I have there in cell H2. Now I could carry on going. I'm going to stop just there for the moment with just 2 pieces of criteria. Close the bracket, hit enter, and there we go. There is my answer. Let's do this again, but let's do it in a slightly different way. Instead of using cell references, I'm going to hard code in what it is that I'm looking for, and I'm also going to search for 3 pieces of criteria. So this time I want to find out the total revenue for all blouses that are blue and a size large. So let's type in equals SUMIFS, open bracket. The first thing we need to tell Excel is what is our sum range while I'm summing the revenue, D2 to D19. The next argument is criteria range 1. So our first piece of criteria is going to be blouse. So where are we going to find our answer? We're going to find it in the range A2 to A19, comma, and our criteria is going to be blouse. Now this time, instead of selecting a cell reference, I'm just going to type in the word blouse. And remember, if you are using text in your formulas, it needs to go in double quote marks, comma, criteria range 2. Well, I want to sum the revenue for all blouses that are blue. So my second criteria range is going to be where I'm going to find the answer, B2 to B19, and my criteria is blue, comma, criteria range 3. My third piece of criteria is that I only want to see the revenue for blouses that are blue and size large. So my range is C2 to C19, and my criteria is size L. Close the bracket and hit enter. And there is our answer. So there we've constructed our SUMIFS in a slightly different way by using text, and we've also used 3 pieces of criteria. Let's do something slightly different again. This time I want to use SUMIFS to sum the total revenue for all blouses where the profit is greater than $2. So we need to do something a little bit different here. We need to use logical operators in our criteria. So let's type in equals SUMIFS. Now my sum range is going to be the revenue, and then I need to specify my first criteria range. So we're summing the revenue for all blouses, so we want to select A2 to A19, and the criteria we're using is blouse. So again, let's just type this in as our criteria. But this time, we only want to sum when the profit is greater than $2. So my second criteria range is going to be the profit column, E2 to E19, and my criteria is going to be a logical operator. And this needs to go inside quote marks, and I'm going to say greater than $2. Close the bracket, hit enter, and there we get our answer. And just to finish off, let's do the big shebang. Let's use all 5 pieces of criteria. Now for this I'm going to use cell references, so I'm going to make a couple of adjustments to my data validation list that I have at the top. So once again, let's select blouse. I'm going to select blue, and you'll notice as I'm doing this, some of these totals are changing. We're going to keep it with size large, and this time I want to sum all of the items that match these 3 pieces of criteria that have a profit greater than $1.40. So equals SUMIFS, open bracket. Our sum range is the revenue. First criteria, A2 to A19. The criteria we're looking for is blouse, in this case G2. Our second piece of criteria is the colour, B2 to B19. And the criteria that we're looking for is blue, or H2. And our third piece of criteria, our criteria range, is C2 to C19. And our criteria is I2, or size L, and then our final piece of criteria, criteria range 4, is that the profit, so E2 to E19, is greater than $1.40. Close the bracket, hit enter, and there is our answer. So let's just do a quick visual check just to make sure that this is correct. So I'm going to look through this list for all blouses that are blue and size large. So there is one just there. And there is another one just there, and I think that's all we've got. So we've only got 2 entries here. If I look at the revenue, if I summed these 2 together, that would be $34. So why do I have an answer of 23? Well, because we're only summing
when the profit is greater than $1.40. So if I look in the profit column, I can see that that automatically knocks this first entry out, and it leaves us with this one entry, and the revenue is $23, which is why I'm getting a result of $23 in cell H11. So quite a few different examples there of how you can use SUMIFs. Of course, there are so many other ways that you can use this and also combine it with other functions to produce some really complex formulas, but hopefully that's just given you a base level of knowledge from which you can build further skills. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I will see you in the next one.
Hi everyone, welcome to this video tutorial on how to use the getPivotData function in Microsoft Excel. Now, getPivotData is always something that I as a trainer get lots of questions about. I think people aren't really sure what it is or how to utilize it, and then when they do, they come across a few little issues. So really what I want to do in this video is just run through getPivotData, how it works, how you can toggle it off and on, and how you can get around some of those little issues that you may come across when using it. So on the screen here, I have a pivot table that I've already created. And this pivot table currently is showing the sum of profit across numerous different products for the months of the year. And what I also have next to this pivot table is another smaller table. Now, this one isn't a pivot table. You can see when I click in it, I don't get any of my pivot table utilities. But what I essentially want to do here is I want to populate both columns of this table using the pivot table data. And this is pretty much what the getPivotData function does for you. Now, just for a bit of background reference, the getPivotData function is part of the lookup and reference formulas category. And there you go, you can see it sitting in there. And it's also a function that automatically gets invoked when you try to reference data that's contained within a pivot table. So let me just start out by very quickly showing you what I mean. If I click in cell K4 and type in equals, what I want to appear in here is the sum of profit for Burlington in January. So I'm going to go across to my pivot table. I'm going to find my Burlington column and January. And if I click on this cell, you can see what I get is an extremely long getPivotData formula. So as you can see there, getPivotData is automatically invoked when Excel recognizes that you're trying to reference data in cells contained within a pivot table. So if we just read across so we understand what this formula is doing, we can see here it says profit and then it says A3. And you'll always find this in the getPivotData formula. It's going to give you first the upper leftmost cell. It's kind of like a table reference point in a way. It then goes through and looks for the product and it's pulling back Burlington and then the month name of January. And if I hit enter here, I can see if I just do a quick visual check that that number is in fact correct. So far, so good. Now what I essentially want to do is complete the rest of these blank cells. So ordinarily, what I would normally do would be to grab my little autofill handle and drag all the way down. But look what happens when I do that. I get the same figure for each of the months, which obviously isn't correct. Now, if I dive into one of these other months, so let's double click on July and take a look at what the formula is doing, you can see it's basically exactly the same formula. It's looking for Burlington and it's also looking for January as opposed to July, which is what should be in this cell. So when I'm copying that formula down, it's not modifying anything in the formula. And this is where people start to come a cropper when using getPivotData. They're not really sure why that's happening or how you can modify that. It's actually a pretty simple problem to correct. So let's go in to our January formula again. All you need to do is replace these field names with cell references. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change where it says product Burlington. I'm going to double click on Burlington and I'm going to replace the word with a cell reference. And I'm going to utilize the table that I'm currently working in. So I'm going to click on cell K3 because that contains the word Burlington. Now in a moment, I want to copy this down and across. So I'm going to need to do some absolute referencing here in order for that to work. So if I'm copying it across, I definitely don't want to lock the column, but I do want to lock the row. So I'm going to put my dollar symbol in front of the row only. I'm then going to do exactly the same for the month. So where we have January, I'm going to double click and I'm going to replace that with a cell reference, which in this case is J4. And for this one, I'm going to copy this down. So I don't want to lock the row, but I do want to lock the column. So a dollar symbol in there and hit enter. And now if I autofill down, you can see that that's working. And if I autofill across as well, everything here is working very nicely. So that's really all you have to do. Just replace those cell references to get everything to work. Now you might be wondering, why on earth do I need to use the getPivotData function when constructing my formulas? Can't I just type in equals and then the cell reference from the pivot table and do it that way? Well, yes, you could do that and it would work. But what you'll find is that if you change the layout of your pivot table, then you're going to start to have problems. So at the moment, because I'm utilizing getPivotData, if I was to move some of these fields around in my pivot table, so let's drag product down into rows to get that layout to display differently, my figures are still working correctly. I've got all my figures in here, even though the values have changed location. Now I'm going to quickly undo out of there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off that getPivotData toggle and then show you what happens if you use cell references. So I'm going to delete everything out of here. Now, if you do want to turn off getPivotData, and what I mean by that is when you type equals and then reference a cell in a pivot table, you don't get that long getPivotData formula. If you want to turn that off, click in your pivot table, go up to Pivot Table Analyze, and in the first group here, click the Options drop down, and you'll see here I've got a tick next to Generate getPivotData. But what I could do is untick that, and I can now utilize cell references instead. So if we go back to our table, if I type in equals, I'm looking for Burlington January, I'm going to click the cell, and now I get the cell reference as opposed to the getPivotData formula. Hit enter. I can double click to autofill this down, and as I mentioned, it does actually work. And I could do the same for Vermont, so equals, and we're going over here this time, G5. And I could then copy that down and I have my totals. So far, so good. The problems start to occur with this method when you start to change the layout of your pivot table. So if I go up to Pivot Table Analyze, let's bring up our field list. And again, I'm going to do the same thing, drag product underneath month name. And you'll see what happens. I'm missing some figures for Burlington and I'm missing all of my figures for Vermont. And that's because the location of these values has changed. So that is the big difference between using cell references as opposed to getPivotData. I'm sure you can see getPivotData in the long run is a lot more beneficial as you can change the layout and the figures will still be correct. Now I've just turned getPivotData back on and I've completed my table using the getPivotData formula. Now, one thing you need to watch out for here is that this getPivotData formula will continue to work as long as you don't remove the fields from the pivot table that the formula is referring to. So my formula is referring to the product and the month name. Now, if in my pivot table I decide to get rid of product from columns by just removing it, I'm going to get errors throughout because the field it's referring to is no longer there. So just bear that in mind that whilst you are free to move your field names around, and this will still work, if you actually get rid of one of them, then that formula is going to break and you'll need to redo it again. But hopefully that explains exactly what getPivotData is, how you can use it, some of the pitfalls you might come across, and also how you can turn it off and work with cell references instead. That's it for this video. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to this tutorial video on predicting future values using forecast sheets in Excel. Now, forecast sheets is actually one of the newer features that's available in Excel. So if you use Excel 2016, 2019 or Excel for Office 365 like I'm using here, you will have access to this feature. And if you want to just do a quick check before we get into this tutorial that you do have access to forecast sheets, you'll find it on the data ribbon in the forecast group. It's next to what if analysis and it's called forecast sheet. So just do a quick check to make sure that you have that before proceeding with this tutorial. Now, forecast sheets is useful if you have historical time-based data. You can use it to create a forecast and essentially predict future values. A forecast can help you predict trends, future sales, future requirements and needs, and it can also help you make better business decisions. And what happens is that when you create a forecast in Excel, it's going to create a new worksheet that contains a table that contains the historical and also the predicted future values, along with a chart that's going to nicely illustrate that data, and all essentially with the click of one button. So it's a really powerful tool. So in this tutorial, I'm just going to show you a very quick example of how you can utilize forecast sheets to predict future values. So I've got my data here, and as you can see, it is time-based data. And what I mean by that is that I have listed out in column A, I have some dates, and then in column B, I have some sales figures. And if you look at my dates, you can see that I log these sales figures in the spreadsheet every single day. And my aim here is to forecast what the sales will look like from January the 19th through to January the 24th. And I can do this very simply using that forecast sheet option. Now, the one thing that you have to be careful of here is that you need to make sure that you do enter two data series that correspond to each other. So in this case, date and sales. And these two correspond to each other because I'm essentially taking a reading of the sales every single day. Now, in order for this to work correctly, the timeline requires consistent intervals between its data points. So as I said, in this example, I'm analyzing sales of every day of the month. Now, you might choose to create a forecast for sales on the 1st of every month, or maybe on the 1st every 3 months, so on and so forth. But it needs to be consistent in order for it to predict accurately. Now, if you don't necessarily have all of your sales figures for a particular date, then that's okay. You can have up to 30% of your data points missing, and the forecast will still be accurate. So let's do a simple forecast of this data. First thing I need to do is I need to select both data series, including the cells where I currently don't have any values. I'm going to go up to my data tab and I'm going to click on forecast sheet. And you can see here it's already given me a really nice little line chart. So everything in blue are the sales that we have. And then you can see using the key, we've got the forecast sales, which is running through the middle. Then we have a lower confidence bound and an upper confidence bound. So it's allowing here or showing any predicted variations, but this main line running through the middle are the sales that it's forecasting based on the data that I have. Now, one thing you need to make sure of is that underneath here where it says forecast end, that you have the correct date in there. So if I look here, it says the 23rd of January. And if I look at my data, I actually also want to include or end this forecast on the 24th. So I'm going to click on the calendar. I'm just going to select 24th in order to change that. Now, you do also have a little options area down here where you can go in and you could start to modify other options. For example, you can select a date that you want the forecast to start. You can do things like detect seasonality. You can change the timeline range, the values range, so on and so forth. So you might want to jump into here and just check some of these. The most important ones, I believe, are the forecast end date and the forecast start date. So my forecast start date here is the 18th of January. Now, I already have a figure there for that, but I don't mind a little bit of overlap. So I'm going to leave that as it is. Now, if I decide that I don't want a line chart, I also have the option of switching this to a column chart as well, just by using this little toggle button at the top. So if I click column chart, you can see there I get the same prediction, but just displayed in a slightly different way. Now I'm going to stick with the line chart and I'm going to say create. And what we see here is that it adds my line chart in. I'm just going to move that over. But then you can see it creates a table and it's giving me my forecasted sales and also my lower confidence bound and my upper confidence bound. So I can very easily see here, based on this forecast, my predicted sales for the 24th of January are $3,491.23. And my lower confidence and upper confidence bound kind of gives me a range that those sales could fall into. So you can see with the click of one button, we've very quickly been able to obtain that information. So Forecast Sheet is a great option if predicting future values is something you do on a frequent basis. Now, if you want to understand a little bit more about what all of those options that we were just looking at mean, then you can refer to my blog post where we go through each one and you can see which ones you might want to change. But otherwise, that is it. Very straightforward, very simple. Thank you for watching this video tutorial and I will see you in the next one. Hi everyone and welcome to this video tutorial on getting started with 3D maps in Excel. Now 3D Maps is a data visualization tool that's available in Excel 2016, 2019 and the latest version of Excel for Office 365. Now if you are using Excel 2013, you can also use 3D Maps, but it is available as an add-in called Power Maps. So you're going to need to jump into your options, go to add-ins and enable Power Maps if you're using Excel 2013. For everybody else, you should have 3D Maps already installed. So if you click on the Insert ribbon, you'll see you have a group, it's called Tours, and you have an option here for 3D Maps. So if you can see that, then you already have it installed. Now 3D Maps or three-dimensional maps help you visualize data in different ways and maybe discover insights that you might not be able to see in traditional two-dimensional tables and charts. Now 3D maps are designed to analyze geographical data. So for example, if you're trying to analyze and compare the population of countries around the world, or maybe analyze crime statistics for different towns or states, that's the type of data that is suitable for 3D maps. It needs to have a geographical element to it. And with 3D maps, you can plot your geographic data on a globe or a custom map. You can show that data changing over time. You can build engaging cinematic visual tours. And most important, any map that you create can be shared with other people. Now, one of the most important things to note here is that 3D Maps does use Bing Maps in order to compile the map. So you need to make sure that when you're creating your 3D map, that you have an active internet connection. So this tutorial video is really just designed to really get you started with 3D maps. You'll see once we get into it, there are so many different options and things that you can do. We're not going to have time to go through all of them in this very short tutorial, but it will at least give you a springboard in which to gain more knowledge. So we're going to create a quick map and I'm going to use this data that you can see here. Now this is data that I've downloaded from Microsoft. And it's basically showing me different power stations in different states in the US and the type of energy that they provide, along with some other information in there. But the main point here is that it is geographical information because we have states, we have counties, and they're all within the US. Now you can also see here that this data is in a table, and I can see that because once I'm clicked in it, I have the table design ribbon at the top. But it is worth noting that you don't necessarily have to put your data in a table in order for 3D maps to work. So let's create our 3D map. Just click anywhere within your data, go to the Insert ribbon. We're going to click 3D map and I'm going to say Open 3D Maps. Now you can see here what it's done is launch the 3D Maps dialog box. And it's given me some suggested tours or suggested ways that I could display my data. Now it's worth noting that these merely act as a template, a starting block. They're simply suggestions by Excel based on the data that I have in my spreadsheet. So kind of look at this. If you're used to using something like pivot tables, there's a recommended pivot tables option where again Excel will suggest to you based on your data which pivot table is most suitable. So this is kind of similar to that. Now I'm going to ignore all of these recommendations and I'm actually going to click the New Tour button to create one from scratch. So what you can see now is I have this globe, and based on my data, Excel has plotted all of the power stations on the map of the US for me. And 3D Maps has basically used Bing to geocode the data based on the geographical information it can find in the data set. Now what you'll see here, again, much like a pivot table, I have this little floating panel. This is my field list. And what you'll see in here are essentially all of the column headings from my original data set. And on the right hand side, I have a layer pane. And this is where I can go in and I can add fields to visualize and analyze my data in different ways. Now, the first thing that you want to check in this little pane is that you have your fields mapped correctly. So I can see here underneath location, it says county and it's mapped it to county. If I click the drop down, it's going to show me some other fields. So if these are mapped incorrectly, you want to make sure you go in and select the correct one. So for example, if where it has state, if this says something other than state, you want to make sure you go in and change that to state province so that it's mapped correctly. Now currently, if I was to do nothing else, this map is showing a blue dot in every location where there is a power station. Now I can refine this by adding fields from the field list just here into these fields down here, height, category, and time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the capacity megawatts field down into the height area. So I'm going to drag and I'm going to drop it to add that in. And you can see that my data on my visualization now changes, and it's given me this little legend down here, which is essentially just a text box, because I'm now seeing a height representation of the capacity of each power station. And if you look at this globe, you can see that we now have our data displayed by height. So you kind of get a visual representation of what that's going to look like. Now, for me, this legend area down here isn't really being very helpful. It's not really showing me anything. I don't really need a legend for what I currently have displaying on the globe. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this text box, press the delete key to get rid of that. So now I might want to display my data in a slightly different way. So I'm going to go to my field list, I'm going to grab the state field and I'm going to drag that down and drop it on the categories area. And now you can see I have everything color coded by state. Now it might be that in this case I do want to have a legend displayed for people who aren't really too familiar with the map of the US and which states are where. So if I want to bring that legend back, all I need to do is jump up to my ribbon, and you can see in the insert group I have a legend option. I can click it and it's going to give me my legend, which I can then move up here. I'm going to resize by dragging these handles in, and I'm just going to drag that down like so. Now also with this legend, you can see that currently the heading of the legend just says layer 1, so it's not particularly meaningful. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to change this heading so that it says states. So I'm going to go over to my layer pane. You can see at the top we have layer 1. I have a little pencil button which is going to allow me to rename this layer, and I'm going to call it state. And there we go. I've now quickly renamed that layer, that legend. Now I could carry on going through, dragging my field list, adding more items into here, and this is very much where you can kind of play around with it and get it to display how you want. There's a lot of trial and error when it comes to these things. If you don't like what you've dragged down here, you can simply drag out to remove that field. Now when it comes to editing, you also have all of these options on this ribbon. So lots of things that you can do in here, and we are going to be jumping into some of these. But you can see I've got 3 highlighted in the view group. So if I want to remove the field list, I can click that to toggle that off or toggle it back on. I can remove my layer pane, or I can toggle that back on. I can also remove the tour editor if I want to get more real estate on the screen. Now, one of the things you might want to do here, and for the time being, I'm going to turn my field list off, and I'm also going to turn my layer pane off, is I might want to navigate around my 3D map. So one thing I might want to do is maybe zoom in or hone in on a particular power station or a particular area. And you can see here in the map group, I have a find location option. I'm going to type in Los Angeles, click on find, and it's going to zoom me into that particular area, and I can see all of the power stations located in the Los Angeles area. So a couple of other things I can do here. I can add some map labels. So at the moment, it's quite hard for me to tell where these power stations are located in the Los Angeles area. So if I turn on map labels, that's going to give me all of these labels. So it's a lot easier for me to interpret and see exactly what I'm looking at. I also have navigation buttons in the bottom right corner, so I can tilt it up if I prefer to look at it like that, or tilt it back down again. I can turn it around either way, and I can use the zoom in or the zoom out. Also, if you have a scroll wheel on your mouse, you can use that to zoom in or zoom out again, so you can get an overall view. So you can see here, it's a really nice visualization. Now that's all well and good. You can take a look at your data, you can move around, it all looks good, but something else that we can do, which you might find really interesting, particularly if you're giving some kind of presentation and really trying to make the data come alive, is that you can create your own tours. So essentially we are in a new tour. You can see here it says Tour 3. If I want to, I can change the name of this tour just by clicking, and I can say Power Stations. And each tour is made up of different scenes. So at the moment I have one scene just here, and that is exactly what I'm looking at. But if I wanted to make this more engaging and maybe zoom in and zoom out of different areas as I'm speaking, I can add other scenes which will essentially create kind of like a mini video tour. So in this example, so I'm going to make this map flat, and I'm actually going to, let's tilt it up this way. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and pull it down like so. So this is going to be my first scene, an overview of all of the power stations across all of the states. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new scene to this tour by clicking on New Scene, making sure I have Scene 2 selected, and this time in this scene I'm going to zoom in on a particular area. So I'm going to zoom in on California. So I'm going to say Find Location, California, and I'm going to zoom this one in just on the state of California, and that's going to be my second scene. I'm going to add another new scene, and this one is going to zoom in on the state of Colorado. And again, let's zoom all the way in there and drag that down, and maybe I want to tilt this a little bit so we get an idea of perspective. I'm going to add another new scene, and for this one I'm going to zoom all the way out so we can see the whole map of the US, and I'm going to tilt that back up like so. Now of course there's lots of different things you can do here, lots of options that you can add. You can do things like add text boxes into your scenes, 2D charts, so on and so forth. But hopefully that gives you an idea. You add scenes to create a tour. Now it's also worth checking, if we click on this first scene, you'll see that we have a Scene Options button on the ribbon. So let's click on Scene Options. You can give each of your scenes a name. So I'm going to say Overview of the US. You can specify how long you want that scene to stay on the screen. So in my case, it's 10 seconds. Now I'm going to take that down to 5. You can choose your effect, your transition, so how it moves between the different scenes, and you can apply some different effects if you want to. So I'm just going to apply, let's just do flyover, just so you can see what that looks like. And I'm going to close that down, and I could go through and do the same thing for each of my scenes. So let's just do one more. I'm going to call this one Los Angeles. And let's do a different effect. Let's do Dolly in this case, and click on close. Now, something else you also might want to do is you can change the look and feel of your scenes. So for example, in this last one, if I jump up to the ribbon again, I have a themes option, which will allow me to change how this particular scene looks. So again, you can go through these and you can choose one that's going to be most appropriate for the data you want to display. So I'm just going to use that one as an example. I'm going to add a quick text box, and the title is going to be All Power Stations in the US, and you have some formatting buttons up there if you wish to change anything. I'm going to click on Create, and I can move that up to the top here. If I wanted to add a background, I could do that as well, just to make it stand out a little bit more. So once you've been through and you've built up all of your scenes and created your tour, you can then play your tour to see what that looks like. And you can see we have a Play Tour button just here. So let's click it and take a look. So this first scene is showing me all of the states. It then zooms in to California. It's then going to zoom across to Colorado, and it's going to go to that more flat layout. It's then going to zoom back out, and it's going to show me all of the power stations in the US. So it's a really nice, smooth, engaging way to visualize and display data. I'm going to press Escape to come out of there. A couple of other things I can do is I can choose to create a video of my tour. So this would be if you wanted to share this with other people, you can package this up into a nice little video, and you can then upload that to cloud storage, send it to other people, and they can then view your tour. Now, as you can probably see, there are loads and loads of different options, different things you can do with this, but hopefully that's given you enough just to get started with 3D maps. That's it for this video tutorial. Please join me in the next one.
Hello everyone, welcome to a new tutorial from Simon Says It. In this video, I will show you how to calculate standard deviation in Excel. We are familiar with Excel's potential to solve complex mathematical and statistical problems. One such common statistical concept that's widely used in real time is the standard deviation. When there's a lot of data, Excel has a set of built-in functions to help you arrive at the standard deviation easily. There are 8 functions in Excel which help you calculate the standard deviation of the given data set. Each function has its own characteristics and is used depending on the user's requirements. The functions can be broadly classified into 2, the formulas which are used to calculate the standard deviation for the data sample, and the formulas which are used to calculate the standard deviation for the whole population. To calculate the standard deviation, first, choose a destination cell. Enter the formula equals STD. Once you enter the initials of the formula, Excel shows you a drop-down from where you can choose the formula you want. It also contains the description and features of the particular function. Depending on your choice, you can either enter the formula by double-clicking on the desired formula or by using the keyboard arrow keys to navigate and press the Tab key. Then you can enter the arguments. Remember, only the first argument is mandatory, and the rest of the arguments are optional. In this case, let us pass the first argument as the cell range. Press Enter. This gives the standard deviation of the data in the given range of cells. In this video, we saw how to calculate standard deviation in Excel. Depending on your purpose, you can choose the formula and calculate the standard deviation. Thank you.
In this section of the course, we're going to explore Excel's what-if analysis utilities. And if you've never heard of these before, you're going to find them on the Data tab. Over in the Forecast group, it's this little drop down here that you want. So there are 3 different what-if analysis tools. We have Scenario Manager, GoalSeek, and Data Tables. And we're going to be looking at each one of these in this section. And we're going to start out in this lesson by taking a look at GoalSeek. So what exactly is GoalSeek? Well, if we take a look at the screen tip, it says find the right input for the value that you want. And the way that I kind of see GoalSeek is it's kind of a way of working backwards from an end point to a start point. So let me show you what I mean. Now, the example that we're going to use here is the example of a loan payment. And in order to work out this loan payment, we're actually going to use another formula that I haven't showed you yet in this course, and that is the PMT formula. And PMT stands for payment, and it allows you to calculate monthly payments on a loan. So we have our loan information just here. So this might be a loan that I'm taking out from the bank so that I can buy a new car. I'm borrowing the money over the term of 60 months at a rate of 3.5% per annum. And what the PMT formula will do is it will work out what my monthly payment is going to be with all of these pieces of criteria. So let's take a look at that function first of all. We're going to type in equals PMT. Now, the PMT function has 5 arguments, with the last 2 being optional arguments. Now, we're not actually going to use the last 2 in this calculation because we don't need them. So the first thing we need here is the rate. So the rate is what I have up here in cell B3. Now, the thing you have to remember with the PMT calculation is that it's going to work out monthly payments. So every value that you select for the formula also needs to be monthly. And currently the rate that I've got selected in cell B3 is the rate per annum. So it's 3.5% for the year. So what I need to do is I need to make that a monthly rate by dividing it by 12. The next argument is NPER, and that just means the number of periods or the number of payments. So I'm going to be making my payments at the end of every month over 60 months. Now again, if I had that in the cell as 5 years, I would then need to do 5 multiplied by 12 to get the months. And then the final argument that we need here is PV, the present value. And this is really the amount of the loan. So that is simply B5. I'm going to close off the bracket and hit enter, and it's going to tell us how much we're going to be paying each month. Now, one thing you'll notice here is that it's showing as a negative value, because the way that PMT looks at this is that it's coming out of your account. So you are down £436.60. Now, if you wanted to make this a positive value for any calculations that you're doing, you can simply put a minus symbol in front of the loan amount, and that will give you a positive value instead. So now I have my final calculation. I'm going to be paying $436.60 a month. Now, maybe I look at this and I think to myself, well, you know what? Actually, I can spare £500 a month. And if I can spare £500 a month, maybe that means I can borrow more money. Or maybe it means that I can decrease the number of months that I'm paying this loan over. This is where GoalSeek comes in. Because by using GoalSeek, we can say, right, I'm going to pay £500 a month. Tell me how much extra I could borrow or how many months I could reduce the term by. So we're starting from our target and working backwards. So I'm going to select the payment cell. Let's go to What If Analysis and GoalSeek. So let's remove everything from here. We want to first select our set cell. So for me, this is going to be cell B6. And I want to set this cell to 500 because that's how much I can afford. And then I need to specify the cell that I want to change. So it might be that I want to borrow more money, or it might be that I want to reduce the term. Now in this case, I want to see how much more money I can borrow if I'm paying £500 a month. So I'm going to choose cell B5. Let's click on OK. And would you take a look at that? If I'm paying £500 a month, I could borrow £27,485, so quite a bit more than previously. And that is the idea behind GoalSeek. You tell it your target and then it kind of works back and recalculates for you.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.